friends, and thanks for stopping by. In this video, I'm sharing how I created the blue version of this Halloween card using stamps from the brand new Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous Halloween release, including Gothic Tapestry, Unraveled, Exquisite, and The Scarecrow. I used the exact same process to create both cards. I just used different colors, and I'll share about that toward the end of the video. To get started, I began with a piece of distressed watercolor paper cut to 4 by 5¼ inches and placed it in my stamping tool. I then began playing around with the placement of the various stamp images and trying to decide which colors to use. For this card, I'm using Distress Oxide and will be using the stamp and smudge technique. This technique quite literally involves stamping the image and then smudging the ink. Distress Oxide works well for this since it is a pigment-based ink and it dries slower. This gives you time to stamp and smudge. On this first grouping of images, I'm stamping in aged mahogany, Distress Oxide. I've chosen 3 stamps and placed them so they are in somewhat of a triangle from each other. This helps to spread the color across the design. After I stamp the images, I'm using a paper towel to smudge the ink. This is one of my favorite techniques for creating stamped backgrounds. The next image is this gorgeous floral from the Exquisite stamp set, and I'm using Uncharted Mariner. Sometimes I stamp the image twice to make sure I get a good ink coverage. However, if the ink is too thick, I dab off some of the excess with a paper towel before I smudge it. I've found that if you have too much ink on the paper and go to smudge, it will blur the image so much that you can no longer see any of the detail. After I stamped the floral in the upper right-hand corner, I flipped it around and stamped it in the bottom left-hand corner using the same technique and ink color. For the final stamped layer, I'm using a couple of the spider webs from the Unraveled stamp set and stamping them in Villainous Potion Distress Oxide. With the stamping completed, I'm now inking the edges of the card with Villainous Potion Distress Oxide using a blending tool. Here, I'm spritzing the paper with a bit of water using my distress sprayer. I'm pulling the trigger slowly to get large droplets of water and then drying the paper with my heat tool. I'm trying to keep the water droplets towards the outer stamped area so that I don't get a lot of ink or color in the center. You'll see why here in a bit. I repeated the spritzing process to add a bit more interest and once again dried the paper with my heat tool. I wanted some smaller droplets, so here I'm flicking the water using the end of the spray nozzle. This is a great way to have a little more control over where the water goes and how much water you apply. And as always, I'm drying after I add more water. Next, I'm inking the edges with some black soot distress oxide to darken them and bring the focus towards the open area in the center. And yes, I added a bit more water, but this time I did a quick mist and dabbed it dry with a paper towel to remove the ink where the water came into contact with it, and then dried it. Now I'm adding some more stamping using the awesome bat stamp from the Unraveled stamp set. I'm going to be heat embossing this image, so I first wipe an anti-static powder over the paper. This helps to decrease any static that's on the paper and keeps the powder from sticking everywhere you might not want it. It is also very important that the ink and paper are completely dry, or the embossing powder will stick to those areas. After wiping the paper with the powder, I'm stamping the image using an embossing ink and stamping it twice to make sure I get good ink coverage. I then remove the paper from my stamping tool, and I'm pouring the black embossing powder over the stamped image. I tap off the excess onto a scrap piece of paper, fold it in half. Here I'm using a small brush to wipe away any stray bits of powder. Even with the anti-static powder, there are still some stray bits that I wanted to get rid of before I used my embossing gun. With the panel ready, I return the excess embossing powder to the jar. The folded piece of typing paper makes this super easy to do. I then turn on my embossing gun, allow it to warm up, and then melt the embossing powder. I don't know why, but even after all these years, watching the powder melt and transform is just magical to me. For the final touch to the background, I'm adding some splatters of Fortune Teller Distress Mica stain. I'm working in a splat box, which is just a cardboard box that helps contain the splatter when working with spray inks. Before you use the mica stains, make sure to shake them until you hear the mixing ball rattle, and then turn the bottle over and make sure all of the mica is mixed in. Then you can proceed with using it. I just wanted some little splatters, so I used the nozzle to flick some onto my paper. Another option, as you can see here, is to use a small thin paintbrush to splatter the ink. Here's a look at the finished card. I added a bit of silver thread and a sentiment from the Scarecrow stamp set. I also did a second card. This one was featured in Tim's YouTube Live. I used Dusty Concord, peeled paint, and black soot oxide ink for the stamp and smudge technique. I then inked the edges with vintage photo oxide. Other than the colors, I used all of the same techniques to create this card. Thanks so much for watching. I'm truly grateful for you. I was wondering if you could do me a quick favor and subscribe to my channel or leave me a thumbs up or a comment. If you're feeling extra generous, I'd love for you to share about my channel with your friends. All of these things help out us YouTubers so much, and it would mean so much to me to have your support.